Well, hello and welcome everyone. This is Frank Days. I'm your host today from Correlsense. We'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, DevOps and the Future of IT Operations. Before we get started, I'd like to go through our brief agenda for the presentation today. First, I'll go through a couple of housekeeping items. Then we'll go through the meat of the program today, which is the history of DevOps, some challenges related to the DevOps and IT environments who are using DevOps, some use cases, and then we'll end it with the Q&A at the end. Just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, we'll try to keep the presentation to around 30 minutes. Feel free to submit questions during this session via the chat window. We'll try to take them along the way as we go. And finally, we'll make the slides available via email and our website after the session. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Amir Gabrieli, Senior Solutions Architect here at Correlsense. He's been working with us for years, helping people solve all kinds of IT operation problems. Now, I'd like to hand the microphone over to Amir.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank. So my name is Amir Gabrieli. I'm a Senior Solution Architect. I have more than 8 to 10 years of experience working with enterprises and Tier 1 telcos all over the world. And today I'm happy to kind of run this presentation about DevOps and the future of IT. So the term DevOps is usually mentioned in the context of agile development and rapid deployment, but in this presentation I will focus on the less talked about aspect of DevOps, which is application adaptation and transition from development to IT operation. Now, I'm going to cover some of the challenges that IT operations face today, how DevOps fit in, and how some new emerging technologies, namely application mapping and transaction management, will play a key role in the tool set used by DevOps. Let's start. Let's start with a brief history and background about DevOps. So, the term DevOps was first penned in 2009. Now, the concept and early adoption are strongly associated with agile approach, and many see DevOps as a tool on behalf of DevOps to deal with the growing rate of rollouts pushed by agile development. However, many in the industry, including myself, believe that DevOps were basically always there, even if not specifically named. You know, it could have been the software architect responsible on system requirements as scaling, session stickiness, failover, alerting, or the guy from the engineering that understands how applications perform and behave in production. It could have been a team leader in production support that came from development, or basically any other staff in IT operations that came with a development background and were able to run cross-discipline projects. So what is DevOps? DevOps is a new and emerging discipline that emerges from the inherent difference, some people will say disconnect, between development and operations. A typical DevOps person is a multidisciplinary engineer. He has a bit of development, QA, and IT operation skills, and usually he reports to operations. Now, if you read some of the industry blogs, you'll see that some people kind of state DevOps should also have project management and system architecture skills. And they need all of this wide variety of skills because DevOps are responsible for cross-discipline projects within IT, mostly gapping between development and operation. So So we kind of mentioned the gap between development and operation. I want to talk about the essence of this gap. Basically, developers, when they develop, they are mostly concerned about the functional requirements and aspects of the software. And they don't really think about the application and how this application will run in production. From the other side, IT operations care about non-functional requirements as application packaging, mass deployment, upgrade, clustering, failover, problem troubleshooting, backups, etc. So the IT operations kind of is more concerned about maintaining the application over time and in high volume, high availability environments. Still, IT operations lack functional understanding of application that could really help them when providing support to these applications over time. And I want to give you some examples of this disconnect between operations and development. A very known disconnect is the gap between, if you'll talk with DBAs, okay, they will for sure tell you the developers don't have a clue when they write queries or develop software that works with a database, and they don't really think about the impact or how their application will perform using the database. That's classic disconnect. But there are some other examples that I can give you. Load balancer, many applications, maybe not so many, but some applications that I know of are highly dependent in the load balancer routing rules to support their unique session stickiness requirements. However, the load balancers are managed and are responsibility of operation, and I know of a situation where operation were about to change the load balancer to a different vendor, a new type of load balancer, and that was intercepted at the last moment by development, basically saying that this new type of load balancer can support the session stickiness rules that the application requires. From application support side, operations need to provide better support for application in production, but it's very hard to provide such a high quality support, especially when dealing with problems that are related to the application behavior, functionality, or even slowdown. So what happens is that you have this application doesn't behave the way you wanted it to behave, operation don't really know what to do with it, so they kind of organize big war rooms, everybody's pinning, there's a lot of finger pointing, nobody really knows what the problem is. That's another classic place to see the gap between all the disciplines. And that's some examples. And one way to look at that is that developers need to make changes in the software, in the application, while from the other side, operation have this fear of change because they need to deal with unknown impact on their IT environment in production. So I want to say a few words about the drivers that make DevOps so popular and pushes this discipline toward an acknowledgement by the industry. Rapid deployment is probably one of the key drivers for DevOps, and it is a direct product of agile development. So DevOps in that regard are the IT operation tool to support and manage the increased rate of rollouts caused by agile development. We also hear about a concept called agile infrastructure. And agile infrastructure is basically leveraging virtualization as a platform to apply agile approach for infrastructure allocation and in a response to new application or application capacity needs. And one more item on that specific context, DevOps in many ways are considered to be the developers within IT and are expected to develop, implement, or customize automation and configuration management solution to support the rapid deployment of new applications. So this is the first driver. distributed system is the second driver that I want to cover here. So applications are no longer monolithic, but they tend to be much more distributed and complex. New approaches as SOA introduces functional IT silos within the data center, within the IT that support application, and suddenly operations are no longer managing only infrastructure, but they also need to manage services that support application. They are expected to understand the service catalog that is available across the data center, how it can support application, and the growing interdependency between application, services, and IT components. And again, in order to do that, the IT operation need to have some development domain knowledge. And again, a good example here will be the growing popularity of ESBs, of enterprise service buses. What we see a lot is that ESBs are gaining more and more popularity as a tool to orchestrate transactions within the IT environment, within the data center, but to the most, ESBs are controlled and managed by operation. A nice, a nice kind of question or something to think about is that today it's not so easy to determine where the application ends and where the infrastructure starts. So application support, and this is something that we see quite often when we meet with CIOs and IT executives. They all want to see IT operation becoming more self-sufficient and less dependent on development when supporting and working with applications. The way they see it is that development should focus on developing and should have less excuses to miss their deadlines because of application support issues. However, in order to do that, that requires kind of a transition of application-specific knowledge from the development to IT operation, a kind of a complicated task and definitely not a generic task. And later on, I want to show you how some available tools today can basically automate this process. And the last driver that I want to cover is a bit more high level. It's basically a growing acknowledgement in the industry to the tradition gap between development and operation. DevOps as a tool should provide a bridge between these worlds to provide a constant feedback between developers and IT. And we know some, I've been to some customers where IT operation installed a dashboard, an LCD dashboard in the development, so development will be aware of the number of tickets that were generated by DevOps related to the application and are now being managed, just for the developers to be more aware. There's a need to implement new measures and metrics for cross-discipline projects, and just a kind of a way to facilitate better communication between the different disciplines within IT. And again, later on, I'm going to kind of zoom in into that, focus on that, and talk about how some technologies can be a platform for better communication between the disciplines. So, more or less, this is the background, that the overview that I want to start with. And moving forward, I would like to focus on the following challenges that you see here, and kind of show you how existing technologies can address and answer those challenges. So, how do we facilitate a rapid application and change transition and changes transition from development to operation? What methods and tools can support that? And that I'm going to cover later. Also, when I'm saying transition, I'm not only talking about the binaries or the deployment process from development to operation. I'm also talking about the transition of application-specific knowledge and know-how to the IT operation so they can provide a better support with the application. And finally, we need to get Dev and Ops team to communicate better, and I want to show you how some tools can facilitate that. So tools. While DevOps are mostly, well, the main tool that industry talks about for DevOps is automation and configuration management tools. I want to talk about transaction management and application dependency as a set of tools that can profile the behavior of an application in production environment and over and across the IT infrastructure. So the same way that a developer will use a code profiler to understand how a program behaves in runtime, the same way that the DBA will use SQL analysis tools or SQL profilers to figure out how well SQL or if you want, how well the indexes are defined. DevOps need to understand how applications perform across the entire IT stack. And let me show you how that can be achieved. So the first tool I'm going to talk about is application mapping. Application mapping is a tool that automatically discovers, monitors, and displays the relationship between complex application and their supporting component. It is also known in the industry as application interdependency mapping, and it is quickly becoming a must-have dashboard for IT managers. You can think of that as a live CMDB that goes beyond the infrastructure and adds the application dimension. Now this live CMDB is self-learning, self-maintaining, and you can trust it to always give you the right status or layout of the dependencies within your IT environment. So just to give you a quick example, here is an example for an application mapping. And what you see here are the IT components within a relatively large data center that support a specific application. Okay, and this topology map, this application mapping was auto-detected in real time. And specifically for this application, what we can see is that it is being supported. It is being supported by a proxy, 2 web servers, a load balancers, 2 sets of application clusters, and some endpoints as databases, mainframe, and queues. Now, as I mentioned before, this application mapping is auto-detected. Any change to the application, any change to the infrastructure will be immediately reflected here. And the reason that application mapping will be a must-have tool for DevOps, it's because it will make the whole transition of information and binaries from operation to development much easier. Okay, that will replace video diagrams showing the network diagram of the application, the constant need to change those videos. It will replace manual provisioning of CMDBs, and it will definitely decrease the long training and handover sessions between development and IT operations. Now, if we look at the future of the industry as it goes very fast towards virtualization and cloud, I don't really see how anybody can manage multiple applications on a cloud infrastructure without a tool that will automatically map the relationship between the applications and the IT infrastructure. So this is application mapping, and the next tool that I want to talk about is transaction management. Now, at its core, transaction management is the ability to trace and monitor the end-to-end transaction execution across any technology stack. And in a way, it provides a real-time view of how the real transaction generated by the real users perform to end user, and also how these transactions perform or are being supported across the entire IT stack. Now, combine transaction management and application mapping together, and what you'll get is a powerful tool that learns and understands application functionality without any prior knowledge or understanding of the application and the application code, and it does that, and basically it gains this understanding simply by following the interaction between IT element, the support transaction, and while transactions are being executed across those elements. I think an example will make much more sense here. So this is an example of how a transaction management tool visualize a flow of a single transaction across a platform. Okay, we have the HTTP request coming from the end user. We can see how it travels across the IT infrastructure, which IT components are being called from the proxy to the web server, through the load balancer into the application server, and also the set of SQL that are being generated at the application server node. We can also see the network latencies in between the calls and how much time was spent on each tier. Or if you want the complete breakdown of the response time, some transaction tools will also show you rendering time of the pages at the end user side. And the beautiful thing here is that first, that was auto-detected. This is the application behavior, which SQL are generated, which function are being called, and that was auto-detected with no prior knowledge of the application. And second, we mentioned before a common language for the IT operations. And if you want a common language, then definitely the transaction are the common languages, a common language among all IT disciplines, because it doesn't really matter what you see in what you do in IT. Your key objective is to facilitate transaction, and anybody from IT can look at this transaction flow and find information important for him. What database calls, developers can see the flow of their services and the SQLs are generated. Network guys can see the latencies in the network. Operation guys can see which IT elements are being called and how much time is spent. A very powerful tool to figure out how applications behave in production. So, just near the end of the presentation, and what I want to do now is walk you through a real use case, showing you how this set of application can really help IT using DevOps to figure out how application behave without development help, a quick transition of knowledge, and basically solve production issues. So in this specific use case, we went to a big financial organization, and they had a serious performance problem with their portal application. Now, from the IT perspective, everything was okay. The LDAP, the web server, the application server, everything was working perfectly good. We went to the developers, and the developers said that basically it's a very simple portal application, making very few SQLs, so there should be no performance problem with the application. And, there's a war room, there's finger pointing, and we suggested to use our technology to automatically understand how the application behaves in order to figure out what went wrong. So let's see how it worked. We installed the transaction management and application mapping technology across the platform, and we basically analyzed some of the services. And again, everything you see here was done without the help of development. We took one of the services and kind of create a model for its performance over time. And what we identified is that this specific service is being supported by 4 different IT silos within IT: application server, web servers, database, and LDAP. And what we kind of immediately noticed is that an average transaction, the average transaction of this service will issue 2,000 SQLs to the TB2. And 2,000 SQLs for an average transaction is not acceptable, and probably the reason for the slowdown. So with the same mapping tool, we kind of zoomed into the database to see which SQL are being generated by this service. And what we detected is that 90% of the time spent in the database processing this service, or even 90% of the SQLs, are one of the three types you see here. So we were able to identify the three SQLs that are constantly being called and are slowing down the system. So we took this information to the development, and we were able to take very precise information to the developers, so they couldn't really push back. And they looked at that actually, and what they told us that they never seen those SQLs before. So we took the same SQLs to the DBA, and the DBA told us that these SQL are typically sent by the portal container. So we sent this information to the vendor. In this case, it was a three-letter blue vendor, and the vendor recognized the problem, sent us a patch. We installed the patch, and basically once we did it, we ran the same analysis again. This time from the same service, the average response time of a transaction went from 4 seconds to 400 milliseconds, definitely increasing the response time 10 times faster. And looking to the database, it seems that the average transaction is now issuing only 65 SQLs and not 2,000 SQL. So that was really a really quick use case showing you how this application, how this technology can easily solve cross-discipline problems and help operation better operate. So I want to summarize the presentation today. What we've seen is that developers are getting increasingly popular, and we believe that we will see and we'll start seeing their adoption moving from SMBs to enterprises, which basically have the same set of challenges, and it basically just takes them a bit more time to adapt to the reality of what's going on in the industry. I kind of covered some of the tools that can help with transition of knowledge and applications from operation to development. And we have no doubt that DevOps will change IT organization, will challenge IT organization to change the way they do business. So I'm kind of completed my use case and my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And Frank, I'll return the microphone to you.
Well, thank you, Amir, and thank you for that informative presentation. I think it's impressive to see the ways that that background information about DevOps and the potential that it can change the way IT organizations are operating today. Well, this does conclude the end of our program today. Just as a thank you from all of us here at Correlsense for joining us today. If you have any questions about any of the content that was in this presentation, or would like to just learn more about what we do here at Correlsense, feel free to email us at info@correlsense.com. If you'd like to get a demo of how the Correlsense SharePath product works, and some of the screenshots today were from the product and how they were used in DevOps environments, you can see the URL correlsense.com/demo. Or you can download our free real user monitoring software at